Awesome. So I'm super excited today. I have with me a very special guest, not that all of my guests are not very special, but this one goes back to a few years ago, actually. And I had thought about doing this podcast long ago with Alyssa's help. And we never really got it off the ground. She has an amazing business, which I'm going to let her talk about more, the Biohack Bombshell. And I just think what she's done is awesome. And I don't know, maybe I was like trying to tag along with her. It wasn't the right time, but it just wasn't. But I'm so excited to come back full circle and have you now as a guest on the show.
Yes.
And to spend some time together and to share a little bit more about your story, because yours is one that sticks with me too, and seeing the progression that you've made and healing in your body. But again, I don't want to get too much ahead here, but like you've got a really good story to share. And I think a lot of people can really learn a lot from what you have to offer here. So again, thank you for joining me and for being willing to do this. If you don't mind, may you please just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your encounter with Lyme and tick-borne illness, please.
For sure. First, I do want to say thank you for having me on here. And I was so ecstatic when you messaged me the other week, because this was something that we talked about. Honestly, it was probably close to, if we really think about it, at least 5 or 6 years ago. And we both wanted to do it. And we had a Facebook group, and it was just something that was heavy on our hearts. But we both also had healing we were doing and other projects we were doing. And so I'm just so grateful that God has led you to, you're doing this. And I'm so blessed to be able to still be part of it in a different way than we, initially envisioned. But I knew no matter what, it would eventually come to fruition. So I'm grateful to just be here as a guest and to support you and share that with others. And it's been a long journey. I know both of us have quite lengthy stories when it comes to healing. But yeah, guys, for those of you who may not know me, my name is Allyssa LaScala. I am an integrative health practitioner, and I am the founder of the Biohacking Bombshell virtual health clinic. So we work with clients all over the world, and I actually got deeper into this space. It all started with my Lyme journey. That was really my first exposure when I think it was around 2011. I was in college. I was burning the candle at both ends, like a lot of us are. And I feel like our culture, just because we live in this burnout culture, is when we start to feel chronic fatigue, when we start to have brain fog or some of these other things, and we can feel that our bodies aren't really happy with us, and we see the symptoms of that, we can just start to attribute it to, oh, I'm just burning the candle at both ends. And we just kind of brush stuff under the rug. And so while I was in school, and I was also working and staying up very late studying, and then of course trying to enjoy myself while I was in college as well, I found myself taking, at least a nap a day, if not 2 sometimes, for like 2 to 3 hours at a time. I started skipping dinner, and it was weird behaviors that were not normal of me, but I brushed it off because I'm like, well, isn't this kind of what you do in college? You just keep burning, you just keep going, the midnight oil, and you take naps when you need to. And so eventually my roommates chimed in, and we were about to go on fall break, and they're like, I really do think that you should get some type of test done. So at that point, I really wasn't exposed to functional medicine, integrative medicine, any type of holistic healthcare very much. But I ended up going to my PCP and just said, hey, I'm dealing with fatigue. And one of the things that they tested me for was Lyme. And then it came back positive. And so I actually went on and off for the next couple of years with doxycycline. And as we know, depending on when it's caught and what the dose is and whatever it may be, antibiotics were not my sole solution. But that was my first exposure after getting diagnosed, going the conventional medicine route, not feeling like my symptoms were resolved long-term, and just feeling like I went to a chronic disease specialist. I've gone to world-renowned endocrinologists, and we couldn't figure out what else was going on. All I knew was that Lyme was a diagnosis that I had had. And then when we retested, everything seemed dormant or resolved. So I felt really stuck. And then over the last, however many years it's been since then, man, it's been over 12 years of this. I can't believe it, of going through this hamster wheel. Over the years, I discovered, oh my goodness, wow, all these co-infections. No one talked to me about that. Nobody talked about how the fact that mold can suppress, TH1 and TH2 and make Lyme such an issue, and you can't resolve it. Nobody told me that, spirochetes can, or, the Borrelia bacteria can be inside of parasites. And if you don't clean out parasites from the body, you can have chronic Lyme. These are all the things that I just didn't know about, but I learned over the years. And so it's been quite a journey. So for anyone out there that feels like they've been doing this forever, like, hang tight, it's okay. But that's the summary of my 12-year long story. And we're still on the road to healing, of course, but there were a lot of pieces I was missing outside of just a Lyme diagnosis.
Yeah. And I applaud your willingness to like really dig deep and learn. And that's one thing you're like, you've made yourself an expert in this just because of your own experience, right? And just the amount of knowledge that you possess is very mighty, and you wield a big sword, and I just think about the positive impact that it has had on your life. But you look fantastic. Like you look like a new person, kind of like every time it's like a new iteration of you. Like you're like one-upping a little bit, every time. And you just look very whole and healthy right now and beautiful. And I'm grateful that you've had a good experience as an outcome.
Thank you.
What you've gone along with here. And so then can you talk a little bit more about what do you think ultimately helped you heal? So, when I hear you, it's like, yeah, you were missing some other pieces. What do you think was I get asked that question too. And it's like, I don't think there's one straight answer, but can you try your best to explain to us how you healed and what do you think made the biggest difference for you?
Yeah, just like you said, it's definitely a loaded question. It's really hard, right? Because it could also depend on the person. I think the most influential variables for me, and what I find that a lot of these same principles carry over to my clients as well, is that number one, no one talked to me about the importance of getting your drainage pathways open. So making sure that the bowels are moving effectively, making sure the kidneys and the liver are supported, that bile production is there, that the lymphatics are moving, the mitochondria are supported, all of those things before going and killing, because this is why so many people get sick, and we have an issue, right? So drainage being first, and then moving into addressing parasites, and then looking at overall toxicity with metals, mold, environmental toxins. I think that's really the combo there that was the most influential for me. And I work with a lot of people that have chronic recurrent Lyme over the years by the time they come to our clinic. And those are the variables that even if they've gone to great LLMDs, they've missed that. It hasn't been talked about much. So drainage pathways open, making sure that parasites are addressed next, and then simultaneously looking into mold exposure, heavy metals, environmental toxins, and things like that. Not only detoxing from those things, but taking the time to have the conversation about how do I mitigate exposure? Because if we're not talking about mitigation and we're just talking about detox, you're going to be on this detox hamster wheel forever because you're going to bed in sheets that are washed in, Tide and Downy. And then you're putting all the makeup on that's full of, the parabens and endocrine disrupting toxins. And I feel like sometimes, depending on who you're talking to, as I'm sure you would agree, you have to go into it with segments and you can't talk about all these things at once because our nervous systems and our bodies are just so dysregulated that if you're telling people that there's like 9 or 10 things that we have to start to consider for health, they're like, what? Can you just give me one? But you even have people with hidden dental infections that until they go to a biological dentist, like you can literally have Lyme bacteria within cavitations in your mouth that they just don't think about. So drainage, parasites, overall toxicity, biological dentistry. And right now I'm focusing heavy on nervous system regulation, limbic system retraining. Those are the things that over the years I found to be the most influential that we just don't talk about enough.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm learning too, as I'm taking on clients, it's like, I know 50,000 things that you can do to help yourself, right? But if I tell them that, it's like, they don't even know what to do. And so I've got to remember, just how was I back then? Go slow, little bits, and even if just little changes make a really big difference over time. And that's really what I think you're very good proof of. Is little steps, little new phases over time ultimately build this huge impact in the end. And it isn't the easiest thing to do, and it gets overwhelming sometimes, and you can lose focus because it is so many different things. Do you think that there's an easy way for people to tell if something is working for them? Because again, when I'm now thinking about it, it's there are so many different things that people can do. Yeah. And I picture people's, like a squirrel. It's they see something and they start trying and oh, I'm so excited about it. And then, oh God, something else got introduced to them and they want to hop over here because how do you really decipher what's good? How do you convince somebody to stay committed to something? How do you help them with that track?
Yeah, that's really good question. One thing that I think is important before we go into what's good for someone, what's not, and how you can tell, especially when it is a long journey sometimes. And you're like, okay, how do I know if I should just wait it out? And if I'm doing the right thing, I just need to have hope and have faith and stay the course. Or when is it time to audit and be like, okay, I think it's time to pivot. I think it's so important that we don't ignore the foundations that are so simple that we overlook them. So making sure that someone is getting enough sleep, which again, so many people just still are not optimizing their sleep. Cleaning up your water with, for me, reverse osmosis or ideally distilled water, adding minerals back in is what I prefer. So clean water, clean air, good HEPA, VOC air filter as well. And so getting those solid foundations, clean water, clean air, clean food, and sleep. If you're doing all the other stuff, you're going to be capped, right? When it comes to the methodology, that's where it kind of gets a little hairy as far as like, how do you know if something's working for you and not? Because I feel like there are so many different caveats. I think it's more of looking at the road to healing as that roadmap to health, if you will, and saying, okay, there's a lot of times that you can do the right things, but in the wrong order. And it can work against you. And it almost becomes this like whack-a-mole healthcare that we have. Oh, let's do Lyme. Oh, wait, no, now it's heavy metals. Oh, wait, now it's this. And it's not this flow that we need to have. So when I'm looking at something in general, I'm like, okay, we're going to start with those foundations. We need to make sure we get drainage pathways open. We need to make sure that we are addressing parasites. Then I typically go into like mold and heavy metals and viral load. And that's kind of the route that we go. I can definitely address Lyme and co-infections and whatnot at the same time, depending on what we feel is appropriate. But it's really the progression through that set path that I feel like serves as a better guide. And so as long as we know that we're going the course, that has been found to work really well for my clients and for myself. Working with a practitioner, I think, is one of the best things, or a coach or whatever that someone can do, because you will constantly sit there and second guess yourself. And so if you don't have someone to keep you sane and keep you on track and to be there and speak life into you and say, I know that you're dealing with this fatigue, I know that you're dealing with this, but I promise you, because of my experience and because of my experience clinically with other clients, I'm telling you it's going to be okay. I think we greatly undervalue that. So I think it's important as well. And then, one of the things that I found with nervous system regulation is that there are a ton of people with Lyme, with POTS, with mold toxicity, with a lot of these chronic issues that they do some of the best protocols. And they have done all of these things, even in the right order. And if you get to the point where you're like, oh my God, I'm still sick, you really got to look at your nervous system dysregulation. You are probably caught in some type of limbic system trauma loop. We can't get out of this like dorsal vagal stage that we're in. I mean, there's so many different parts of being in that fight or flight or freeze or whatever stage. And we tend to think, well, it has to just be another detox. I had to, like, maybe it's just like this resilient Lyme bacteria. And a lot of times we're giving that total credit, where it's like, if you regulate your nervous system, your immune system's regulated. And then now all of a sudden we can take care of that. So it really depends on the client as far as like what they are having the mental capacity for, as you know. But if I can get someone, as we're starting to address foundations and go through drainage and parasites, et cetera, to start to even just appreciate or value the fact that they have to also start to regulate their nervous system, they are so better off than us getting 6, 12, 18 months down the road and being like, okay, are you ready for that yet? I know it's not the sexy stuff, but like, can we do the hard work? And eventually we have to. I haven't found a client that didn't to some degree need to address that.
Yes. And that's what I find when I do these interviews with people, especially those that were sick longer term. That's really the missing piece for people, is like, I don't know if you're thinking of it like you've got a more scientific name. I'm thinking of it more as like the spiritual or like the deep rooted emotional stuff that you really got to lance and suss out and figure out what's going on inside there, because until that's in a state of peace and harmony, like you really can't let go of the rest of the static, right? Like that's just still so much static in somebody's body. And so how do you recommend, like, are you able to go into any type of overview of how you recommend people regulate that part of their bodies? Like, what do you fall back on, like meditation, breath work, that kind of thing? Or is there other stuff that you're more familiar with?
Sure. So there's a bunch of different approaches that are out there, of course. And just like when you're doing different protocols for Lyme or mold or whatever, certain things may work better for certain people than others. But my favorite thing that I've found so far is actually a program called Primal Trust by
Yeah.
Dr. Kat. So that's one of the newer ones that I learned about from a fellow practitioner friend of mine. And she actually has gone through Lyme and POTS and getting to the point where her chronic fatigue and her nervous system regulation was so poor, having numerous children as well. She couldn't work, she could barely tend to her kids, etc. And so she ended up getting to this, like a lot of us do with the field that we're in health, out of total need. So she went down the route of meditation, DNRS, the Gupta program, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and basically brought everything together in a way that I think is just genius and beautiful. So her approach is this top down and bottom up approach. So brain to body, and then the body to brain and the somatic side to things. And so I've been through DNRS, which is that dynamic neural retraining system for those people that aren't familiar with that. And I just feel like in general, there were pieces that were missing, and there are actually a lot of people in her program. We have some study groups, there's different calls that she does. So you get to interact with a lot of other people if you want that are going through that. And that's a general consensus that I found with a lot of those people is they've gone through some of these other programs, especially things like DNRS, and there were just components missing, especially like the deeper somatic side. So I think that's one of the best solutions out there. There's the science portion, but there's also the somatic portion of it. There's group support. And so if someone's really looking for something where, yes, there's a degree of self-navigation, but they want something that is laid out very well, very specifically, in a way that is, in my opinion, easy to navigate with plenty of support, I think that's the best program that I know out there. But if someone wants to do meditations, get in prayer, be in the word, whatever it is for them, that's how I started. And I still am always very deep in the word for sure. But I knew there was more to that. And I use this in combination with that as well. And I think that's essential. I don't think we should be doing any of this without the help of our Savior. So if somebody wants to kind of start off with just being in the word and in their faith and getting around like-minded people in the church, that absolutely is very therapeutic as well. But especially people in the chronic illness space, I see they need to better understand, like, why am I having this symptom, to take away the stigma that goes away from that and actually understand why is that going on, so you can calm it down and then use the tools in your toolbox for the somatic side of things. So Primal Trust has become my favorite so far.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I appreciate that, because I actually am somebody who's kind of still thinking I have some nervous system regulation to do and a little bit of PTSD yet lingering from my experiences. And so maybe this will be something to assist me with that shift as well. Because it's a little bit of a different space to live in, right? And I mean, when you're going from fighting to save your life every day to coming back to being a healthy, whole individual, how do you really shift that speed, right? I only knew one speed for a really long time, and that was just to go as hard as I could to make it work. And I don't have to necessarily be there anymore. And I don't know if other people, I'm reading a book called Between Two Kingdoms that was recommended to me. And that girl's talking a little bit, she had leukemia as a young person, and then she got healthy. And so she talks a little bit about that in between space too, of like, it's just weird to like go back to being normal and how to write that, but and to not always be like waiting for something else to happen to you too.
Yes, for sure.
Especially
if you're in the space and where like you're helping other people with this. How I thought of it is, first of all, I knew I had nervous system regulation. I just knew in multiple areas, like it's not like it was debatable for me. But I also, if there's like health professionals or coaches or whatever that's in this space, for me, I was like, okay, if there's even just the chance that I have some slight improvement myself, but a lot of it was, I want to learn how to better help other people with this. So any health professional in this space, I think it's essential for us to be able to identify and either incorporate some of these practices with our clients, or to be able to know enough about it and understand it to be able to say to somebody, go and do this. Because it's a very affordable program as far as like her monthly breakdown. So I think it's ingenious what she's done there. So definitely check it out.
Thanks. Yeah. And I've heard of it before too. So that's good. It's kind of like another poke from the universe. But and then too, I just want to stop for a second and call out, I really do applaud your openness to connection to God and spirituality and how much he plays a part in your life. That's something that's always been consistent with you since I've known you. And I think maybe I don't look in the right spaces, but not a lot of people really talk about that as comfortably and as open as you do. And I find that it is a very big part of it, because oftentimes I thought, well, I've talked about this in the past, but I was like so mad at God, and I couldn't even go to church for the longest time because I was so sick, and I couldn't understand why he since doctors said there was nothing wrong with me, that I didn't understand why he made me broken then, because that's the only other conclusion I could come up with. And I hated him. And I look back and I'm it's like that whole adage of like, you're never alone. He's carrying you just when you thought you couldn't even go. And it's like, I see that so clearly of how much he was there with me. And that presence protected me and kept me safe and going. I'm with you with that, but probably maybe not quite as open about it as you, but I do appreciate that about you very much.
Of course. And I'm glad that you brought that into the conversation, because I don't think it's brought in enough. And there's times where we need to let go, let God. And sometimes all you can do is be in the word. All you can do is play a sermon. All you can do is have someone speak life into you. And anything that we have, any supplement, any resource, any program, any person that's helping us, it is from him. So we need to give credit where credit is due, if you will.
That's right. I agree with you very much. And I guess then that could kind of lead me into, were there times as you're going through this that you knew that you were going to get better? Or like, I can remember specific moments through my time that I was like, whoa, I know I'm healing, or I know that was a sign from God, or I know that was something that he showed to me to let me know that it's going to be okay and to keep going. Do you have any recollection of things like that at all on your journey?
I feel like I had more of glimpses. And I know that's the case with a lot of my clients too. And that can be a blessing and a curse. Sometimes you have really good days or good experience, and it's like the veil is lifted. Sometimes it was a validation of certain times where like, oh my God, parasites, they're vectors for Lyme. And like, even just learning some new information, even if my symptoms didn't shift, I was like, oh my gosh, that's new insight. I'm going to address that. And so new information and understanding gave me hope. And then there were other times where I absolutely had like decent days. I had a great experience with family or just a better day. And I was like, okay, life can get better. I know maybe the next day I get frustrated because I'm like, how am I back here in the dumps? Like, what is this roller coaster and who can get me off? So it definitely happens there. And I think it's so important for us to constantly talk about that. I still have days like that, because as you start to get better, you push yourself more, you say yes to more things, and you push the edge of the envelope. So we still experience those. But yeah, I have had both educational relief days and I've had both symptom relief days. And I just looked at it as, again, going back to my faith and saying, I know it's not in God's will for me to suffer endlessly. I'm going to stay strong in him. I'm going to make sure that I take this pain and I turn it into purpose and say, how is he getting me to lean heavier on him? Because it's all pointing back to him. And that's one of the biggest things that I found as I was going through this journey is, if it wasn't for this, like the gratitude that I had to be like, man, I wouldn't have gotten in the word as much. I wouldn't have listened to as many sermons if life was easy, because I feel like I'm good. I'm doing it all on my own. I'm fine. Like, what do I need that for? In reality, that's what a lot of us just innately do by default. And so it's been one of the biggest blessings, because without loss, without suffering, without a lot of these other things, we're not quite as pressed. When everything's fine and dandy, we feel kind of self-sufficient. So in the end, it's that gratitude and seeing like, what else can I do? And connecting with other people in a healthy way that we're dealing with chronic health issues as well, not getting in Facebook groups and reading everyone's complaining and all that stuff, because I think that's very toxic, as I'm sure you would agree.
You remember, that's why we started ours. So that
yes. But to have like good, healthy, Christian-minded women is typically who I would connect with, to like have a couple of people to be like, can you just listen to me today? Can you relate with this today? And we'd speak life into one another. And you and I both know there's a difference.
Huge. And it's trying to explain to people, and I wish I could just like make it so clear for them to see. It's like, don't get caught up on all the excuses. Don't get caught up on the negativity. Don't get caught up on the people who say you're going to be sick forever. Like, focus and hook your star to someone like you or me, who's like, oh, hell no, I'm not going to stay in that space. I've got to get myself better. I have too much living to do, and I can figure this out and I can get well again. I don't care what so-and-so tells me, or, and so that's really important, to surround yourself with the energy that you want to have, right? Don't put yourself with the energy you don't want to have, put yourself with the energy that you want to have. So Thank you for talking about that. Can you then also, I don't know if you want to talk about this right here, but I feel like you've shared it openly in public before, but I feel like you also had surgery in the past too that helped you out a lot. And I don't know if you're comfortable to talk about that. I figured as much, but I'm like picturing those in my head, and I wish I had an actual picture. I don't know if you have a picture of them, but if you can talk a little bit more, I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So Anne is referring to my breast implants that coincidentally, ironically, however you want to phrase it. So February 2011, I got implants. I was a sophomore in college. It was something I had thought about for quite a while. I was like, yes, I want to get them. And then in November of 2011 was when I got diagnosed with Lyme. Now, many of us know when we've been immersed in the Lyme world, there are plenty of people that have Lyme and other, pathogens, whatever in their system, and they function just fine, right? But when you have a loss, when you have a surgery, when you have 2 toxic bags put right in your system, when you have, whatever it may be that shifts that immune system, you have an opportunistic bacteria or opportunistic pathogens that we're dealing with that eventually you could start to have an issue because they're taking advantage of that suppressed state. Maybe someone moves into a moldy home and that's the case there. But it's been really interesting over the past couple of years how many surgeons and other people I see speaking to this being like, it's not like we have a direct causation study here saying, hey, this many people with breast implants start to get Lyme. But surgeons are starting to see a pattern and saying, why is it that there are plenty of women out there that they didn't have Lyme before they got implants, and then within a couple of years, we're seeing it there, or a couple of months, we're seeing it there. So I think there's a lot to be said about that, and I'm sure more will come to light in the future. But yeah, I didn't really put 2 and 2 together with that until, when did I get my explant? 2019? Yeah, it's been a little over 4 years. And I just got to the point where I had addressed a lot of stuff with Lyme. I had addressed mold to some degree. I didn't know about drainage still yet. I didn't know about parasites still yet. I knew that for me, I wanted to check my implants off the list. I was just so sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. And I'm like, even if this literally changes 0 symptoms, I cannot, after having these things for 7 or 8 years at this point, I cannot wake up every day and be like, is it the implants? Is it not? Is it the implants? Is it not? Because you had women that were coming out about breast implant illness. So I went to my surgeon, and I actually went to my functional MD first. I had been seeing him for like 5 years or so. I told him I was thinking about getting them out. And he was like, are you sure you want to do that? Not that he wasn't supporting me, but we could address this or that. And I'm like, we've been addressing stuff for 5 years. Like, I just can't anymore. So I ended up going and, getting them out. I had found out a couple months before that I had mold toxicity. Then we tested our home, found mold in the home. And ironically, when I took my implants out, we got them removed. I asked for them back. You couldn't visibly see any mold in them before, like when I took them out, right? But I would watch them over the weeks and over the months. And I just kept them in the same surgical bag when I came home. And we found, after our home had already been remediated for mold and everything there, I found it very ironic that over the months after I explanted and I watched these, mold was visibly growing in there. And if anyone wanted to go to I think it's in my BII highlight bubble on my profile on Instagram, you could absolutely go ahead, and I have visuals in there on numerous occasions. But whether or not the mycotoxins were in there and they just started to develop after I pulled them out of my body, or even if some people will say, well, how do you know that they weren't just exposed to mold in your home somewhere and it just grew over time? And I'm like, that's a case that you could argue, but those valves, you're not supposed to be able to get anything in. Like, they tell you that. So it was just some more proof to say Lyme bacteria, whatever, can get in these and cause more issues. So I explanted. It was not my end all be all. I work with plenty of women that explanted and are like, crap, I don't feel any better. Some with Lyme, some not. So I do think that when someone's dealing with Lyme and you know that you have an immunosuppressive concoction of toxicity in there, I think it's worth thinking about getting them out. And don't look at it as the end all be all, but no matter what, I was like, I need to have this off my list. So when you can get them out, I think it's smart.
Yeah. And that's the picture I remember, is just seeing the mold in them. And I think about, I talked to a fair amount of women that have them and they're not able to get better. And so I think like you is like, well, let's eliminate all possible challenges that we can and then see what happens. But I like, what did you call it? A concoction of toxicity. You just make me chuckle with that because that's really what it is, you know, and unfortunate. It's not necessarily explained to us like this, and it's glamorized and made to feel like it's something so good to do for ourselves. But in all actuality, it's probably very detrimental to our health.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you were able to get them out. I would encourage women truly to think about this as something, if you're not able to get well and you have breast implants, again, the number of times that I've seen this help in the healing journey, like you're saying, it's maybe not the end all be all, but it is another step towards getting some of that static out of the body and helping your system to start to regulate itself again. And then how do you feel about, I don't know if you're including this in some of the steps that you listed, and maybe with the parasites and stuff, but gut health, how does that play into this, and friendly gut bacteria and the biome? Where do you really work on that with people?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we could bring that into the conversation here. When it comes to Lyme, you know that it can cause a lot of gut, whether it's gut permeability or it gets caught in the biofilms in there that we're not addressing, or you have parasites within the gut or systemic parasites that absolutely can harbor the bacteria. But yeah, I mean, it's one piece of the puzzle there. For me, I focus on, in the beginning of my clinic days, I know how I was initially trained was going through addressing candida and SIBO and just like balancing the gut, and hey, that's going to help everything else. But what I found is that when someone's not addressing parasites, whether they are the parasites that are more gut specific or whether they're systemic in the joints, in the lymph, in the brain, whatever, that's the biggest thing. So I would prefer, again, doing drainage, doing parasites, going into toxicity. And then if I'm ever going to re-inoculate the gut, doing the probiotics, doing some of those things, it actually tends to be later on, because of the fact that when we're putting probiotics in earlier on, we definitely can do it. But sometimes it's like putting new furniture in a house that's already on fire. And it's like, you didn't even address all the other stuff that's causing the permeability and all the inflammation. So you can only get so far. So that's kind of the biggest takeaway that I would have when it comes to the gut there. But I think we just greatly overlook parasites and overall toxicity, especially in the water that we drink or the food that we eat, that's constantly adding it in there.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's a very valid point. And I think about a lot of your posts that I used to see with parasites and the cleansing of parasites and stuff. And it's like, oh man. And so how do you think people can identify if they have a parasite? Is there an easy way for people to be like, oh, I better go see Allyssa and get some help?
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to parasites, there tend to be some telltale signs, whether it's someone having increased symptoms around the full moon, dealing with insomnia, teeth grinding, vaginal or anal itching for sure, super, super common there. People can have irritability, gut discomfort, even when it comes to Lyme, there's a lot of overlapping symptoms. You could not be sleeping, you could have Lyme, you could have mold toxicity, you could have glyphosate exposure, and how many of those symptoms are going to overlap? But in my parasite highlights on my profile, because I get these questions so often, I've archived a lot of this stuff. So the specific symptoms with parasites, but truly, I love my friend Dr. Todd Watts will say, if you have a pulse, you have a parasite. So when people are like, do I have them? Do I need to go run a $450, $500 stool test to know? First of all, they're highly false negatives. The stool is not the only place you'll find parasites. They degrade a lot of their DNA before it even gets to the lab or when it's getting out of your system. So there's a lot of false negatives. So I greatly go off of symptomatology, and I just assume, okay, everyone needs to do this. Other countries do this routinely, and we've just made it so taboo here. Like, oh, there's no way we could have them. Meanwhile, you have people that have pinworms all the time. You have liver flukes that are super common. If someone wants to examine their stool and compare with things, I do have plenty of pictures in those highlights if someone wants to kind of point things out. But 70% of parasites aren't even visible to the naked eye. So I tell people it's not the end all be all there. I do think it's a good practice for people to do at least 2 to 4 times a year, because we have a parasite epidemic because we have a toxicity epidemic. Ideally, the immune system keeps Lyme, keeps parasites, everything else at bay, but all the toxins, all the EMF, all the stress, it's not the same as it was years and years ago.
Correct. And that's what, coming from an Ayurvedic approach, we look at the liver and how the liver has been impacted. And you can't really detox because your liver is already just so toxic and angry. Like you're going to try to put something in there to help it detox, but you're just making it even angrier and having a counter effect. So you have to figure out how to do that smartly and go about it in a gradual way, as opposed to like hammering it super hard. But again, it's all these extra toxins that people are not accustomed to, and not getting the right sleep, I think, also can really add to it, because that detox cycle that we go through naturally overnight isn't happening. And so you talk about the importance of going to sleep on time. We say in Ayurveda, go to bed by 10 p.m. because for each hour you go to sleep before midnight, it supposedly counts for 2 hours of rest the next day. But also that's ensuring that you're getting enough time for that detox cycle to happen.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of value to just some of those simple pillars that you had mentioned as foundational places to start for health. And then, yes, you can look at these other tentacles and start making adjustments and figuring out really what serves you. But some of those basic things are huge.
Yeah.
And then I would say you kind of talked about it, and in my head, I feel like I know the answer to this one. But being that we're here on the silver lining, can you tell me what would be the best thing that's happened to you as a result of getting Lyme and tick-borne illness?
Yeah, I would say my connection with God, like I hinted at earlier. That's the biggest thing, is strengthening my faith. I've been on a couple calls before this, can you tell? Runner up to that would be the ability for me to hyper accelerate my need to learn and pour this into other people. So I remember, because clearly this was early on, I was 20 when I first got diagnosed with Lyme. I'm now 32. And so when people say, wow, I can't believe you've dealt with this for so long. I think it's been a gift to be able to help me learn at an early age, where a lot of people, your body's still pretty optimized and it doesn't catch up to you maybe until a little bit later, or you have people in their late 30s or in their 40s or in their 50s. A lot of people will assume that because I was in my early 20s, they're like, could you possibly relate to me? Like, could you possibly have essentially lived life long enough to experience a lot of these things? And so it got me to experience things way earlier on in life. And a lot of people wouldn't experience those until a little bit later. So it's been a gift to get that knowledge sooner rather than later and be able to help more people.
Yes, I agree with that very much. And that's more of what I was thinking. Like, I see it as like, okay, you had this horrible thing. It really shaped you as a person and changed the way that you view the world. And it's made you just a much stronger individual to be able to, like, I don't want to say carry, but, carry other people, help other people, show them the way, get them into a space where they feel good like you do, and to have that inner peace and that connection to God. Because I find when we're sick, and I think I'm good proof of that, is like that connection to God, maybe it gets stronger for people in sickness, but for me, again, like, it made me really mad at God and hate God, and like took that away. And I think about just being like a good citizen or a good human, right? Like, if we're sick, our brains, we can't think that way. Like, we can't connect to source. We can't really put ourselves into our purpose because we're just too tethered to too many other things, or like not feeling well. So I'm really glad that you were able to get well, and that you did have the experience early on. I also feel like I remember, and you've not really talked about it, which I'm glad for, because hopefully it didn't scar you too horribly, but I feel like there was a time in your life where people weren't really believing you with the Lyme thing too. And so I think that was also a very hard space, obviously, when you're so sick and people don't believe you, or they don't support you. Is that just like a short period of time that I'm remembering, or did you have a lot of trouble with that for a while?
Yeah, I think it's still, to some degree, it still exists. It's just that I push it off, right? So when it came to Lyme specifically, for example, when it comes to the testing that they do for Lyme, and this huge debate about which blood markers are the best ones to test for, and standard blood markers versus something like Vibrant America has like their tick-borne panel that a lot of people use for blood, or you'll have a panel like that from DNA Connections that'll do urinary analysis for Lyme and co-infections. There's just so many different ways that people debate on, like, how can you accurately diagnose this? And then when it comes to muscle testing, applied kinesiology or whatever, when you're looking at frequencies, you'll have people that will muscle test for, Lyme bacteria within the muscle bellies of their legs or in their brain. And then you'll have a conventional medicine specialist be like, oh, I don't believe that, it's hokey pokey, et cetera. So we could totally go down an entire rabbit hole with just testing methodologies all on their own. But I think that was one of the hardest things, was for one, we want validation to have a diagnosis. So if there's no solid protocol that everyone agrees upon, it already makes us feel wishy-washy. And it's like, who do I believe? And do I believe myself? Or is this practitioner just telling me what I want to hear? You know, is it valid? There's so much questioning. But eventually I got to the point where I was like, I was open to other forms of testing and with applied kinesiology and muscle testing, because I'm like, it matches my symptoms. And I started to learn more about it. And I'm like, I absolutely agree with, believe in this. And so that was with Lyme. And then you'll have even things like mold toxicity, where you'll have functional medicine specialists test for mold through urine. And it's like, cool, I can see the mycotoxins in my urine. Yes, this is valid. And then you still have people even in the functional medicine space, tell their patients, you have NDs that will still tell their patients, there's no way that mycotoxins can be in the body. And it's still this huge debate. And I don't think we're ever going to get on the same page. So I think what kind of came about for me was I just had to get in line with myself and be like, I'm going to choose who I believe based off of the information that I have. And I got to either put the blinders on, silence the noise, and listen to like one or two people, because otherwise you're just going to feel like a squirrel in traffic and you're going to be super scattered. So it even now still happens. I mean, even as a practitioner, you have people come in and be like, that's not true. No, we don't have parasites in this country. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to sit here and debate for the rest of my day. So, but yeah, it still happens. And I think that's one of the most important things for people to realize is that there will always be debate. You will always find someone who preaches A versus preaches Z. And if you're waiting for them to be congruent or synergistic or whatever, it's not going to happen. So you personally have to decide with your comfort level what you want to believe and what you want to do.
And that's fair. And that I think applies to a lot of things. But I know in particular, I feel like when you're sick, it's really hard sometimes to be strong, to stay committed to self, and knowing that self is the one that is feeling whatever it is that we're feeling. And we've got to be the ones to help ourselves. Like no one else will necessarily come in and swoop down and do it for us, unfortunately.
100%.
Although I guess fortunately too, because we get so much growth out of it, but it would be nice if someone could have done a lot of that work for me.
Right? Yes.
Cool. And so if someone was interested in working with you, what's the best way for them to contact you, and what would that really look like? I know you kind of went through some different things, but are you virtual, or do you have a walk-in clinic? Like how does that work for you?
Yeah. Several years ago, we started doing things 100% virtually, even before COVID, before, telehealth was all the rage. We did it virtually because I loved the idea of being able to connect with clients all over the world. So yes, we work in the United States, but I've worked with people in, United Kingdom, in Qatar, in Australia, all over. So the option is there. And for me, that was such a huge blessing, because I'm sure, as you know, there are plenty of other countries that they don't even acknowledge Lyme. Like it's not even a thing to them. And so that, on top of mold toxicity and everything else, that if it needs to go out beyond the US, then that's what we'll do. But when it comes to the very first step, if someone wants to work together one-on-one, we typically start with what I call my Healing Accelerator bundle. It's my initial consultation bundled with a couple of other things. And that's available on my website at biohackingbombshell.com, or you can find it linked in my bio on Instagram. That's our primary channel where we do a ton of education. So I know a lot of times anyone's like me, you really like to get to feel out a practitioner before you're like, hey, this feels like a fit. Not everyone's for everyone. I want you to feel out my personality and the type of things that we talk about. And so that's why I put so much time and energy into the content we put on social media, so that someone can feel that. We have many people that until I see them on that call, they're like, I've been following you for the last 3 years. I'm like, cool. So you've been able to really see what it's like. And they at that point know that it feels like a fit. So we have plenty of free content in there. I have a free 3-day drainage clinic that's linked in there that a lot of people start with. They binge watch highlight bubbles, look at parasite pictures, whatever they want to do, and feel that out. So there's plenty of other free content if someone's like, hey, I just want to take the first step to just see what this is like and enter your world. And so Instagram's the best place to do that.
Perfect. Thanks. And I'll put that into the show notes then as well, for people to have a little more ease to find you. But I know I see your stuff popping through all the time, and it's just really beautiful to see the journey that you've been on and how far you've come. You've been on national TV, been all over, you have really blown it up and made a really great space for yourself. And that's something to be really proud of. So
thank you.
Yes. And again, thank you for your time here. Is there any last words of advice you would like to leave with people in terms of their journey with Lyme? and anything that you might want to tell them other than what you've already given.
I think you've done such a beautiful job at hitting on just about anything I could possibly think of that I would have wanted to tie in. I think this just so beautifully flowed here. I think it would really just more be an encore reminder that don't get stuck on just Lyme. There's always other things that are intricate. So if you have an LLMD or any practitioner that you're working with, and all they seem to want to talk about is Lyme, there's nothing wrong with continuing to see them, but I would bring another practitioner into the space, or maybe try another practitioner altogether that really does take this holistic view of looking at the other root causes that we talked about today.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's really important. And that's a great reminder because, again, it is not just Lyme. There are lots of different layers of static within humans, and trying to figure out which ones are specifically affecting you and making it a little bit harder to like function and focus is critical. And it is not just, again, one sure thing that's going to do it either. It's a trial and error kind of method in figuring out what's the right fit for people. So thank you for being here and giving people a space to land and a place that they can go for guidance and a good compass and somebody to encourage and cheer and root them on. You're a great person for that.
Well, thank you. I'm grateful for you having me, and I'm covering you all in prayer as you continue on your journey.
Oh, thank you, Alyssa. Good to see you again. I'll talk with you soon. Thanks. Bye.